designed to prevent kidnappings by imposters, to fight fear and intimidation, to promote accountability and transparency by visually identifying officers, and by tracking their actions so that nobody operates with impunity in the city. Next slide, please. This is not new to here. I mentioned LA County. We also have California that did it at the state level. There's been work done in Chicago and other parts of the country as well. Each thing works within that jurisdiction's state legal framework. We're going to work on things that operate within our legal framework and hopefully improve on the model that they provided. Next slide. And this is just the other piece of context. Each thing we do is not going to solve the problem alone, but together can. And so we're trying to build a defense one brick at a time. You see the first three things that the council has passed, a fourth that came out of committee in December from my colleagues here, and which is not yet on the council agenda, and then this would be the fifth if passed. Next slide, please. Okay, and just a quick overview of how this got here. I mentioned earlier it's version 6. We started working on this in August. We consulted with the administration before we ever drafted anything. We then drafted something, met again with them. We paused it in October while working on the Sanctuary City codification work. And then in November, later October and November, brought it back up, got some community input, made a couple more rounds of feedback with the administration as well. And this is the first time it's being presented publicly. Next slide, please. All right, 4 key components of the legislation: masking, identification, verification, and documentation. We're gonna go through each of these in brief, and then we're gonna talk about some questions that may come up. First, the purpose of this under masking is to establish a standard that masks are not commonly acceptable for law enforcement in the city of Portland. While we only can direct our Portland Police Bureau employees directly as our employees, it is important for us to establish the standard for all law enforcement operating in our city. There's a legal sensitivity to make sure we're not specifically targeting any one type of law enforcement, and this is transparently an effort to avoid some of the legal issues that have come up in California, among other places. There are key exemptions and exceptions that have been brought up thanks to engagement and feedback from our public safety service area, including the Police Bureau, including things like medical reasons, to stop the spread of infection, occupational exposure, like hoarder houses, for example, and cold weather. We're also including CERT, which is what we call SWAT here, and undercover operations. We're defining it as near freezing with wind chill factored in, or plainly if emergency warming shelters are open, then it's obviously going to be accepted that police officers can wear something to keep themselves warm. Next slide, please. For identification, it benefits everyone to ensure that we know the identification of a law enforcement officer through things like a name tag, agency insignia, visible badge numbers, and basically what we're calling in the legal language, indicia of authority. This is the things that you need to know to ensure that you're confident that someone claiming law enforcement authority has it. It is modeled off of PPB's existing policy. There are some adjustments, and there's still some elements we need to work out with them. Again, this is not a final draft. I just wanted to be transparent about that. Again, with Melissa Hortman, the imposter had a uniform and a squad car, and we need to make sure that someone not only looks the part, but that their agency validates them. That's why we move into the next phase, verification. When officers can't tell whether someone is a legitimate law enforcement officer and they're doing something that would be illegal if they were not law enforcement, then we are instructing Portland Police to look into it. That can look like a phone call to your supervisor who calls someone in DC and verifies, is this actually somewhere where this agency is operating? It can also look like a voluntary conversation, hey, are you ICE? But it doesn't constitute a stop because it's just a preliminary investigation. Now, if reasonable suspicion exists, we then move forward into the next step. We've retained officer discretion so that they know how to handle that best, but it starts generally with a call to the agency. This is legally compliant with federal standards for reasonable suspicion because officers are not being directed to automatically arrest or detain, and again, they're recording the steps and information they receive, which leads me to documentation, which occurs primarily through body-worn camera. When the cameras don't capture the information, there'll be an incident report, and what was seen, what was investigated, what indicia of authority was observed. This creates a record that can be used by the Attorney General at a later date, which serves a legal structure and builds an institution beyond just us here at the city. I also just want to recognize that we are very explicit that this ordinance is not designed because it's illegal to supersede federal or state law, and that we also recognize that we have to be in compliance with that law, including the Public Employees Collective Bargaining Act. And together, the goal is that you will have a right to know who is policing you. Next slide, please. I want to just quickly talk about some feedback we've received and some potential concerns that have been raised. And you'll see each slide in this series has things on the left that we've heard or that have been speculated about, and just some additional information. And I also want to be transparent as we get towards the end. There are a couple things we're still working on. So there's a claim that the feds will not comply with rules around masking and that we can't require PPB to hinder a federal investigation. But the ordinance doesn't do that. It determines masking and identification rules for a standard for verification. In fact, not only is there no requirement to hinder a federal investigation, it explicitly states that once someone is verified as federal law enforcement, PPB will actually disengage. There are implications throughout this on what happens if there's the verifications that are already happening now without this legal protection of the ordinance and with it as well. Next slide, please. There was a concern raised that this might ban good mask usage, such as the use of N95 or KN95s by PPB, or masking during hazmat incidents, or that this is somehow trying to make a broader anti-mask statement for the broader public. As you can see, my office certainly doesn't believe in that. My staffer has a mask on right now. We are definitely in support of the idea of that, and this ordinance clearly applies only to law enforcement. In fact, it also specifically requires exemptions for medical or public health and occupational safety, which includes those hazmat type of situations. Next slide, please. There's a conversation around mutual aid, which is when police from different jurisdictions have agreements to assist each other. The claim is other jurisdictions won't want to follow this when rendering aid to PPB, or that the Department of Justice, the federal Department of Justice, could claim that increasing our standards might cause us to be out of compliance with the settlement agreement. I want to be transparent. There's no reference in mutual aid to mutual aid in this ordinance, but it would apply to all of the partners that we have. But state law is going to require policies of all law enforcement agencies around masks. There's a conversation going on right now at the state. We already have rules that apply in our jurisdiction. Our laws are not 100% identical to Gresham or Lake Oswego, and we are already expecting that there's a compliance with that. And I want to just start by saying, or I guess conclude this part by saying that the settlement agreement, we've already seen the feds try to weaponize that against us. We fought back against that. We'll keep fighting back against that. Next slide, please. There was an assertion made to us that we would need criminal penalties for police officers if they don't comply. There are no criminal penalties in this ordinance. We don't believe that those criminal penalties are necessary. Instead, the ordinance simply requires documentation and conversations with supervisors for exemptions. We also got a request to look at a community portal to file footage of potential imposters or report noncompliance. We haven't responded to that yet. It's just something we heard, and I want to acknowledge that transparently, but say it's still in progress. Next up. There was a claim that any verification is illegal, and I want to start by saying the protections of the Supremacy Clause apply to people that can prove that they're feds, because before that, anyone can just say anything. The federal reasonable suspicion standard requires a very clear set of circumstances to engage in a stop. We've broken up verification into two parts: a purely voluntary part, where we're calling the agency or asking, but nobody's obligated to respond. And then if and only if reasonable suspicion exists, then police officers can proceed as they already would by investigating, including potentially making a stop. Next slide, please. We got pushback on having too many exemptions for masks, that allowing it for cold or protective purposes create too many exemptions. I want to thank the Public Safety Service Area for engaging with us from the beginning on this and talking about it. Each exemption was carefully constructed, and PPB specifically gave input into that. Our goal is to avoid undue restriction and maintain operational capacity. And I also want to note that after an ordinance gets passed, PPB would implement these through their directives. That's just one of the steps that would happen. Next slide, please. There's a conversation around state preemption. I speak to the bill's sponsors regularly, including earlier today. The state law actually just simply makes a requirement that we do something like this, and that every jurisdiction in the state do it. It's designed to create a floor. Next slide. And then I want to be transparent. Not everything got resolved. We're still working on a few things. This is version 6. In version 7, we've got a few things we're working on, ensuring that we're aware of what impacts this would have on PPB capacity and resource needs. There is an open conversation happening about what the exact requirements are for PPB to display on uniforms, but that's really about what the federal agents would display on uniforms. We just need to get some consultation on its impact locally. And then broadly speaking, we want to make sure that this makes sense not only to lawyers, but it makes sense to everybody, so there's clarity of language across the entire document. I'll go to the next slide, please. And actually, before we do that, I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to welcome up the folks from the Public Safety Service area, and then I'll have a couple minutes to wrap up after the end of it. I just want to thank, I think we have Assistant Chief Hughes from the Portland Police Bureau, Deputy City Administrator Kazi. I know we've got a couple other folks in the back from PSSA, and thanks, Bree, for being here as well.
I'm Bob Causey, DCA of Public Safety, and thank you for this opportunity to address the proposed ordinance today. I am committed, along with the entire service area, to working with council to enact sound operational legislation that genuinely protects our community. We can all understand that the federal government's recent actions have been alarming and deeply disturbing. Communities across our nation feel threatened for their lives and safety. Many of us have been directly and indirectly traumatized by what we've witnessed. And as we've heard testified repeatedly in these chambers, many live in daily fear of what is to come. As an Air Force veteran, I am personally heartbroken over what I'm seeing as I contemplate the importance of supporting and defending our Constitution. Those of us who have dedicated our careers to public safety must state unequivocally, due process is a cornerstone of American justice. As Deputy City Administrator of Public Safety, I take the safety and security of our community very seriously. As Chief Day often says, our duty is to reduce both crime and the fear of crime in Portland. Chief Day is speaking at the House Judiciary today to discuss a short session proposal. As mentioned earlier, the Law Enforcement Accountability and Visibility Act, where he will be sharing some of the following. PPB has invested years building trust, particularly with immigrant communities and communities of color. Local police exist to promote public safety, not to enforce federal immigration policy. That distinction matters, legally, operationally, and most importantly, to the people we serve. Over the past year, public confusion has intensified as residents encountered armed officers whose identities and authority remain unclear. When people cannot readily distinguish local law enforcement from federal agents operating under separate mandates, trust erodes rapidly. And that erosion doesn't stop with one agency. It spreads to every officer wearing a badge. As many of you know, PPB testified in federal court, which resulted in a court decision to disallow the mobilization of National Guard troops into the streets of our city and state. This, along with a concerted approach from council, executive, administrative, and legal offices, has been one of our city's greatest successes. As I mentioned before, I'm committed to working with City Council to enact sound operational legislation that truly does protect our community. And now I'd like to introduce Assistant Chief Brian Hughes to discuss some of the administration's perspective with the legislation currently as written.
Good afternoon, co-chairs and members of the Community and Public Safety Committee, as well as all the people that have joined us today in the council chambers. For the record, my name is Brian Hughes, and I'm the Assistant Chief of the Operations Division for the Portland Police Bureau. It's an honor to be here, and I appreciate being invited into this space and share some of my perspective. I appreciate the PowerPoint that you just delivered, Chair Canal. That's the first that I had been able to lay eyes on that. So part of the thing that I'm going to talk about today has to do a lot with what you've put up there. And I do appreciate that you called out at the beginning of this that this is not a vote to pass this on. This is more of a conversation. So some of the issues that you've already highlighted, I will also highlight, and I'm looking forward to continued conversation on these topics. I have a slideshow prepared, and we'll bring that up. So the overview for where we're going to go today is just some core considerations that I want to raise from the Police Bureau standpoint. They'll be falling into three buckets: legal, operational, and labor. Next slide. We'll jump right into the legal aspects. The Portland Police Bureau will always follow Oregon and federal, as well as our core obligations. I want to highlight that federal law does supersede local law and ordinances under the Supremacy Clause, as you've already called out. The city has no authority to require federal agents to unmask or identify themselves. The DOJ settlement agreement requires that any change to identification standards for us or reporting must remain compliant with our already pre-existing federal oversight. So they would need to be partners involved in this as well. The PPB already requires officers to display identification when it is practical, safe, and tactically feasible. These standards are trained, audited, and enforceable through discipline. And I'm pleased to say that when you see our Portland police officers operating out in the community, they don't look anything like what we've seen with some of the federal response here in Portland. The officers don't wear masks. In fact, I personally, in the vehicle I drive, have been asked if, because I drive an unmarked car, if I am a federal law enforcement officer. And, we start by showing my face, and clearly I am not, and I'm here talking to you. So just want to highlight a quick little story there. But back to some more operational consideration. I'm sorry, we're still on legal considerations. The ordinance restates these requirements, but removes the safety and feasibility direction that allows them to function in a real-world conditions. I want to highlight near freezing. That's subjective. And when we talk about that, that looks different for me being a 6-foot-tall person with a little extra fat on my body than somebody that maybe doesn't look like me. So some subjective aspects there. The city attorney's office has confirmed that Portland cannot compel federal officers to unmask, alter appearance, or identify themselves. Federal agencies simply will not follow this city code. So therefore, the ordinance only applies to PPB, even though many of these concerns relate to federal activity. And appearance-based criteria cannot operate as mandatory triggers for detention or enforcement. Officers must rely on the totality of circumstances analysis to remain within constitutional limits. And I noted in your draft that there was some discussions in trying to identify what reasonable suspicion is versus what probable cause is. And we train that in a legal environment to our officers to understand what that is. So that's a real-world operation that they operate in. And to codify that and say that this is reasonable suspicion or probable cause is very problematic for us. In our world, we operate often on Court of Appeals opinions that get into the weeds and get into the details to discuss that. So that the legal court system is already addressing these issues, kind of where DCA Causey started to go with us testifying regarding the National Guard. Also add that I was one of those people that testified on behalf of that. And it was an honor to do that for the city of Portland. And I was proud to do it, and we won. That's the area where I think a lot of this should reside. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Operational considerations. PPB cannot interfere with or hinder federal operations. The concern I have for my officers is by articulating what exactly they should do in these situations. I always look at that and wonder if one of those things is not present, then what's the next step? And I have a concern that for officers, they're not able to take that next step. And should they interfere with a federal investigation, which probably would be claimed if one of my Portland police officers tried to do that, that would then be used against the officer in potentially Title 18 and Section 111 of the United States Code, which talks about interfering with federal law enforcement. And I just want to ensure that we keep our fellow coworkers, our Portland police members, away from that. Let's see. Continue on with where I was. The ordinance creates a permanent reporting requirement that will significantly increase administrative workload and require additional record staffing without the FTE authorization for those staff members to do that. I did not bring the numbers on what that would look like, what we anticipate that would look like. I can drill down in that and we can address that in further conversations. Uniform and name tag changes would also cost approximately $560,000 by our estimate and take 18 months to 2 years to implement. Many of you already know this, but Portland police officers' badge numbers are not on their badge. And I know that's traditionally when you hear it like in the media, people ask, I want your badge number. Well, we don't have them on our badge. We have DPS-ST numbers, which are issued by the state of Oregon, and that's traditionally the way we identify. And that's how we would identify. So altering that and new name tags and everything else, that comes with a cost. and it's an unfunded cost at this moment. The documentation requirements placed on patrol supervisors will slow response times, reduce proactive work, and potentially increase backlog. The ordinance narrows officer discretion without providing alternative protections, leaving officers vulnerable in crowd management, hazmat conditions, and medical situations. Operational clarity becomes strained because PPB is expected to follow rules that cannot be applied uniformly to all law enforcement in the city. The mutual aid topic that you had up on the screen, that's real. Thursday night and Friday night, in anticipation of potential unrest, we called upon our partners with the Oregon State Police to come join us. That's a very recent example. But over the years, we have had challenges with outside agencies coming to assist us, and certainly this could present another challenge for them doing that. And it can be very taxing on your coworkers and my members when they're out there night after night after night doing this. So I just want to highlight that. Next slide, please. We'll get into some labor considerations. I understand that we do have some representatives potentially from the city attorney's office that may be able to expand on these issues for you. But some of the points I've pulled, identification standards, masking rules, and additional documentation directly affect working conditions and officer safety. Kind of I talked about earlier with that subjective nature of what near freezing means. And I will also highlight that that could be different at 102 in Gleason, out in District 1, than it does look down here at 6 and Alder here in District 4. These matters are likely mandatory subjects of bargaining under labor law. Negotiations with the Portland Police Association just started, and that would certainly be an area where they would want to be at the table when it comes to these discussions, right? It affects their membership. Implementing these requirements without bargaining risks grievances, which are costly, unfair labor practice complaints, or delays in implementation. And collective bargaining requirements also necessitate changes to the ordinance language before it could be operationalized. And next slide, please. So some main takeaways. Many of the elements of the ordinance are already achieved through our existing PPB policy, which requires identification while preserving a necessary safety discretion. Several key goals of the ordinance cannot be met because federal officers are not subject to city code and will not comply with these requirements. Other provisions cannot be implemented due to constitutional limits, officer safety concerns, and mandatory bargaining obligations. The result is a measure that places significant operational, financial, and potential legal burden on the PPB without achieving its intended transparency outcome. And those are just some thoughts I had, and I believe I'm going to turn it back over to DCA Kazi for some closing comments.
Yeah, just in closing, excuse me, AC Hughes spoke on a very high level of some of the concerns that the service area has with the existing version of the legislation. We also have Ron Zito from BHR, Heidi Brown from the Attorney's Office here to answer specific questions that might be helpful for this committee. And again, I want to thank this committee for allowing us to speak to this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, DCA Kazi. Thank you, Chief Hughes. I also just wanted to take a second to thank Chief Dobson, I know, for the comments he'd given in the National Guard case. And you mentioned the records clerks, who I know are often forgotten when we talk about PPB. But the professional staff there are appreciated for their work as well. And certainly records work at PPB might be the hardest records job in the city, maybe the state. So thank you for that. We'll go back to slide 30, just a little bit to wrap up here. And I appreciate the comments here, and I appreciate the information that's been provided over the course of the last, 6 months now, to try and help us build something and hopefully build it better when we get to version 7. I also wanted to take the chance to thank the hundreds of people who've emailed, called, or otherwise contacted our office, the 139 and counting people who submitted written testimony in advance of today, the community-based organizations who provided feedback, and of course the people who haven't yet testified but you signed up and you're about to. And I just wanted to quickly highlight a couple of those themes that we heard. We have a broader opposition to mask use by law enforcement generally, a desire for documentation, this is the next slide, please, so that federal law enforcement or anyone who's non-compliant can be held accountable later, maybe when there's a government that is willing to do that at the federal level. Support for visible identification that can be matched, and that's names and faces, a commitment to transparency and accountability. And I will also say, because this has come up a lot, we've gotten a lot of clarifying questions after this has come out, because I think this is something that we need to make sure community understands. One thing I didn't bring up is there is a risk that I want to acknowledge that people might think this does more than it does, or that we've raised the expectation of PPB's involvement higher than is realistic. And I just want to make a commitment publicly that whether it's now while we're discussing it or afterwards, that we're going to be transparent about the limitations of what this legislation can do and not overpromise. Because I want to, both for the sake of our employees at the Portland Police Bureau and for the public's expectation, it's good to be transparent. And I'll close with, again, what we believe that you have a right to know as Portlanders. And I want to thank everyone for the information, for the presentation, for taking the time to listen here. Please feel free to email my office at counselor.canal@portlandoregon.gov if you have more information you'd like to share with us or thoughts. Please feel free to testify on anything you've heard here or about to hear in our discussion. And with that, I'm going to, before we get to public testimony, there's time for clarifying questions. I'm going to let Co-Chair Novick chair that part.
Thank you, Chair Canal. Councilor Murillo?
Thank you, Chair Novick. Could we have the public safety folks come back up here? Because I think my questions are mostly for you. And while you get back up here, I just want to say, Councilor Canal, thank you for bringing this ordinance forward. I know that Councilor Smith had been in discussions about this before, and this is such a meaty and important policy. And we do have so many different entanglements and restrictions with the federal level, but I also think that from what I've read in this policy, I don't think that this applies to those restrictions because of the way that you crafted it. So I think my question to the Police Bureau is, I understand that you cannot intervene in federal enforcement, right? Because then that would be putting the much more highly funded, militarized ICE agency against our somewhat militarized PBB, but significantly less than the federal government. What? I'm just being honest, okay? We have, look, but if you cannot even know that an ICE agent is an agent and they are a masked rando that could be pulling someone into a van, how could you be accused of, like legally, of intervening with ICE if we have no idea who these people are? To me, that seems like you would be doing your job as an officer to verify who that person is, because no one knows who they are.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Commissioner Modio. And the part that causes me concern with the ordinance, frankly, is the exact number of requirements for identification that an officer must go through to include a clear face, an identification, all the things. We have regularly worked out in the field, not with ICE agents, but in the field where ICE agents are operating, to be able to interact with and see what that looks like. And most recently, the Chief's Office has given direction for when community has concerns to call us. And our direction to our officers is that we will respond. And in those cases, when an officer goes out, for example, if they see the patches that you all see on the back of maybe a vest that say DHS and that kind of thing, when we see multiple of those and other things, badges, DHS badges and things like that, that's what satisfies that for us when it comes to, are these federal law enforcement officers or not? The concern I have is that if it's not all of the things, that puts the officer potentially in violation of the ordinance by not doing all of those things.
Yeah, I understand that, but also I can order a jacket that says like Fed whatever on Amazon any day of the week. And I could start kidnapping random people. Maybe if I work out, I can start kidnapping random people. I don't know. But it's very easy to impersonate someone. And aren't these things that officers need to think about according to the ordinance, but they already need to think about them in order to assess reasonable suspicion? So why would you be uniquely worried about this ordinance as opposed to just these are things that you factor in when you're doing an assessment?
Well, it's codifying what it ultimately ends up being a totality of the circumstances. The officers, they may look different depending on what situation it is. There may be some present at one and not all present at another. So the situations, to be frank, present differently to you.
Right.
And when it's, when there are people that are buying a jacket off of Amazon, like you said, I will highlight that the person that committed the crime in the other state, taking the lives of the legislators, was ultimately captured by law enforcement.
Yeah.
And they used the tools necessary to them to capture that. None of this ordinance would have prevented that from happening.
Right, and I think that this already conforms to the reasonable suspicion standards, and the language of the ordinance says including but not limited to, as far as the things that you have to identify. So I'm just not seeing, I'm struggling to wrap my head around the pushback, and so I'm asking some of these questions as clarification before we get testimony.
Sure.
I will pause there.
Well, Counselor, I'll also offer that Counselor our Chair Canal at the beginning of this articulated that this was more of we're on ongoing conversation, we're taking feedback from each other, and that we're continuing to discuss these as we go. So we're a learning organization, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here.
Counselor Smith?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I have a question. Is Aaron Schmatz here? Is Aaron here? Could you come up to the diocese, please? I have a concern. Could you explain to me how this may interrupt with labor practices or contracts if this goes forward?
Sure. We did begin and agree to ground rules for our successor bargaining agreement yesterday, actually. I was made aware of this ordinance months ago, I would hesitate to say. I mean, and I have sent, I think, 4 or 5 or 7 emails regarding our concerns about the bargaining implications. Anything that has to do with changes in policy, changes in equipment, changes in safety are subjects, and also things which there would be discipline if you do not follow said ordinance are subject to mandatory bargaining. Our contract, we're the longest consistently running police union in the country. It's very mature. There's a lot of substance to it. And so it is critical that we ensure that, as we move forward, we understand any changes and we bargain those. There is longstanding PECBA rules surrounding once a successor bargaining agreement begins, all discussions around changes to said contract should take place at the table, not at many tables. And we actually, our big concern here is while we're bargaining with the city and our successor bargaining, that we can be sure that we're doing that in one place, not in many.
So
Apologies.
are we at risk right now?
It is the perspective of the PPA that having this conversation, we're happy to have this conversation at the bargaining table. If council wishes to have conversations around subjects which are mandatory for bargaining, we would love to have those conversations and discuss and debate those in bargaining.
Mr. Co-Chair, could you address this? Is this something that we need to deal with right now?
Today is just a discussion.
Okay.
And we've got 10 minutes for council discussion written into
Okay.
the get here. So I think it's something we can take up offline. We don't have to
Okay.
resolve it today.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you for your response.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Smith. Maybe I just pose these questions, might have time to answer them. One thing is, if Heidi Brown is here, I'm depressed to hear it stated definitively that we simply cannot make federal agents, take their masks off. And Heidi, your name was taken in vain. I just want to know if you are comfortable coming up and confirming that.
Good
And
afternoon.
if you're not comfortable with confirming it, please tell me.
Good afternoon, councilors, co-chairs Heidi Brown, Chief Deputy City Attorney. And I'm sorry, the question was about enforcing this against,
Saying that, it was stated that under the Supremacy Clause, we simply can't make the federal officers take their masks off.
I think that if provided there's reasonable suspicion that a crime may have occurred, for example, a kidnapping, then you would treat it like any kidnapping if you have reasonable suspicion.
I'm
If
sorry.
at some point that reasonable suspicion dissipates, that's when the supremacy clause then inhibits our law enforcement from requiring federal officers to do things.
Okay, I wasn't actually thinking about the reasonable suspicion thing. I was just thinking about in general. This ordinance says that officers shall not wear masks except under certain circumstances. And I think the assertion was made that that would not apply to federal officers. And I just want to know, is that absolutely certain, or is that something that could be litigated or whatever?
The case law and supremacy clause would make it extremely challenging for the city to prevail on that. I hate to say that we would absolutely definitively lose on anything, because I'd always like to keep my options open, but it would be extremely challenging for us to prevail.
That's what I want to know. The other thing I wanted to say is that I came in here kind of, a question for Councilor Canal is, do we really think that, I would kind of hope that under existing practices, if somebody is grabbing somebody and there's absolutely no indication there's a federal agent, then our officers would, of course, intervene. So I was going to ask Councilor Canal if he really thinks there are instances where federal agents are grabbing people, there's no incident, or people pretending to be federal agents that are grabbing people, there's no indication they are agents, and our cops aren't doing anything. Based on what Chief Hughes said about the concern about liability, I now am a little worried that makes me a little more worried that maybe that would happen. So in the course of 1 minute, if each of you could give a 30-second response to that. I mean, is this something we really should be worried about? And if, I'll leave it at that. First, Chief Hughes.
So if you're asking me if this is something to be worried, I cannot think of any time in the city of Portland where that's happened, where somebody's put on a vest and done this. I also have confidence in the police officers as they're out patrolling around. Should they see something like this happen, a person wearing no identification whatsoever and doing that, absolutely they would engage.
Okay. And Councilor Canal, the question to you is, do you think that have there been examples where the police haven't intervened when there's no indication somebody's a Fed?
I'd be happy to show multiple examples of people contacting my office with the assertion that there have been calls to our 911 center in which the response has been, if it's ICE, the Portland police will not engage with it. Now that's what I'm hearing. I want to stress I have not heard. Sorry, if you.
Okay. I ask people to keep any commentary non-verbal and non-audible. Jazz hands is one thing, stabbing is another. Thank you, Councilor Canal.
Yeah, so I don't want to sit here and tell you I think it's definitively true. I'm just telling you I'm hearing it. And so I'm happy to show a lot of examples of that. The other piece of it is this is not just about in the event where they're already there. It's also about if there's a call coming in to respond to that situation. And I can tell you, looking at the reports I hear from the schools in my district, that a lot of the examples we're hearing about, particularly fathers being accosted as they're dropping off their students, are being done by people who don't have credible indicia of law enforcement authority.
Okay. I think we should now move on to public testimony. So I return the gavel.
I'll just make one quick note, which is I'm happy also to help connect if there's things that might be better in an attorney-client privilege setting so that Heidi can give more information to anyone who may want it.
Counselor, if I may ask just a clarifying question. You had mentioned, it sounds anecdotal, calls to 911 told that PPB would not respond to these types of calls. Is that?
Yeah, can't interfere with ICE. I mean, I have emails I have, in 311. There's a lot of this that's come into my office.
Okay. If you wouldn't mind forwarding all of that information to me, because I would like to investigate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I will shift us gears now to the public testimony side, and then we'll come back and do some counselor discussion after that. I want to note that we did have, Diana, how many people have signed up for public testimony?
We currently have 49 people signed up for public testimony.
Okay, so I believe this has already gone out or been said, but that does mean that when we have this time limitation and that we are giving 2 minutes per. I do want to stress that the faster we're able to have the first few people heard, the more likely it is that we have time for the 49th person. And I have no idea what the order is. I'm trying to get through everything. We'll try to keep the record open so that people can testify again in the future and that your written testimony doesn't need to be submitted twice. I do want to thank everyone again for submitting the written testimony. I have it here. Please do keep the jazz hands as the primary form of response. With that, Diana, will you please call up our first panel of testifiers?
Sure, I'll call up 4 people at a time. If you are in the room, come up to the table. If you are online, you can unmute yourself. So first, Catherine Jimenez, MB, Amazia Jeffs, and Nancy Whedon. Oh, and please identify yourself when you start. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. My name is Catherine Jimenez. As we've seen the horrors unfold in Minnesota across the country by DHS's terror campaign, the majority of the nation is now realizing something Portlanders have known since the summer. This is not about public safety. This is about instilling chaos and complicity by fear into the electorate, and we knew this was inevitable. We knew this after witnessing one of our own mothers being dogpiled by agents face first into the mud for wearing a banana suit and playing the clarinet. We knew this would happen after witnessing dozens of attempts of vehicular manslaughter by federal agents peeling out of the McAdam facility, narrowly missing pedestrians. We knew this would happen when the majority of ICE detainments reported in 2025 occurred at places of work, at places of worship, at courthouses, at schools. We knew this would happen coming from the same police department that cost the city over $22 million in settlements alone. We heard multiple times from public briefings last week that community trust in police bureaus is slipping. It's gone. As far as this community has seen, PPB and other bureaus have made it clear who they are protecting. The same masked, untrained, volatile individuals who are desecrating what it means to be a public servant. This policy is the bare minimum for building back community trust and proving us wrong in that matter for public safety offices. And while I could go on to recount the failures of our local law enforcement, that deters from the greater message here, that a mother was shot and killed in the face, dropping her kid off at school. And the guy who did it, this alleged agent, called her an effing bee. Real professional in terms of law enforcement. And to honor her legacy, I had a poem that I was wanting to read, but it looks like we're not going to have time for that. Please look up A New National Anthem by Ada Limon, the 24th elected Poet Laureate of the United States. And please remember Keith Porter Jr., Silverio Villegas Gonzalez, and all others who have lost their lives and are still missing due to this evil, hateful agenda. Stand up, fight for your community. This is what we want. Thank you, Council. All right, we're ready to move? Okay. I'm MB, and I'm testifying in support-ish of this ordinance, but let me make this clear. This is the bare minimum, and in no way is this going to be the thing that will save us. And, quite frankly, I doubt PPB or the feds will comply with it. The only benefit of this ordinance is the specific information that BPB might collect for reports, and again, that's only if they comply with it. To ensure said information is gathered, I suggest implementing a system for community report PPB officers that don't try to collect data, essentially a tool for community members to hold them accountable. Along with that, actual punitive repercussions for officers who don't comply with this, would comply with what's being required of them. And, I think we all know, PPB has a sordid history of racism, killing and maiming community members, a history that mirrors that of ICE. I hate to make a moral plea to the cops of all people, but PPB should be jumping at the opportunity to arrest and convict actual criminals, actual vile, murderous scum. And again, I'll wrap this up by once again demanding that the permit to the McAdam facility be revoked. How many more community members have to be disappeared and killed before we stop giving them a a home base to operate out of in the city? You want to dismantle ICE brick by brick, then I suggest getting rid of their disgusting fortress they operate out of in here. What do we got? 30 seconds left? All right. Also not really understanding why we're putting the safety of PPB officers over our community members. That's laughable. It's really laughable. You signed up for this job. If PPB is going to do one good thing, well, the police are even still a thing, this might as well be it. That's it.
Hi, my name is Amzai. I'm a resident of St. John's and an organizer with Socialist Alternative, and I want to speak in favor of Councillor Canal's legislation. ICE has escalated from terrorizing communities to outright murder in recent months, and we need every piece of legislation possible to disrupt their operations. Councilors Green and Murillo have spoken in recent months about the need to throw sand in the gears of ICE's operations. I completely agree with that and support this legislation in that spirit. But I think as socialists, we also have to go further, point towards dismantling the whole capitalist machine that turns those gears in the first place. And when it comes to legislation like today, or to further reaching proposals like revoking the Macadam ICE facility permit, which I do want to be on the record in support of, I think we've heard understandable hesitation about that. We've heard about the supremacy clause, the stacked conservative courts, the fact that federal forces can just, ignore laws that we pass here. And all of that's true. It's obstacles we have to overcome. I think we have to recognize that the victories against Trump and his administration aren't going to happen in the halls of power. They're going to happen in the streets. They're going to happen with mass workplace action, like a coordinated one-day strike. And we need to use the legislative process, right, and the resources of elected office to raise people's sights in that direction, to push the envelope, right, even tear it open. Respectively, I think go further than brick by brick in the pace we're approaching that. I think, we need to be raising the confidence of workers, of young people, immigrants, everyone oppressed by capitalism to take matters actually into their own hands, shut down business as usual with mass coordinated action, class struggle, right? That's where the actual power to defeat Trump and get through those legislative obstacles lies. And I think that's actually exactly what dozens of unions, socialist groups, and rapid response networks in Minneapolis have come together and called for just this morning. They're calling for a day without shopping and without work, a one-day strike on January 23rd in Minneapolis to shut down ICE. So I think, we need to take that kind of approach here too, use legislation like Councillor Canal's really relentlessly as a springboard to point in that direction. Thank you. Solidarity.
Thank you for your testimony. Diana, will you please call up the next group?
Nancy, you're online. You can start.
Hi, yes. My name is Nancy Moreno Waden, and I'm here today as a concerned community member. I'd like to say that although I do support the mask ordinance, I would like to say that part of me feels or wonders that are we even past this point now? Every day there is some new tragedy happening that is affecting our most vulnerable communities, which is the immigrant population. And I can't help but notice what is happening in other cities or not happening in other cities that have also put the mask ordinance on, and how DHS and ICE is not complying with that, and how the Trump administration has in some ways stopped it from actually taking effect. The fact that in Minneapolis, a concerned community member like myself was murdered in cold blood right in front of her family and friends and community. That should be the alarm sounding off for that. The alarm sounding off that our community needs something more than just the mask ordinance to stop the injustices that we are all witnessing. The fact that DHS and ICE's methods of shooting first and asking questions later had 2 of our own community members tragically shot is an outrage, to say the least. I call on all you city elected council members to please remember what made you want to be up there in the position that you are today. What prompted you to want to make a change for your community? And did you hold your elected city council members or officials accountable when you were where I am now on this side as a constituent on the matters that were important to you? Or like in our case, in a matter of life or death. We urge you to please get creative, make some good trouble, I don't care, but get ICE out of our communities by revoking the permit. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our testifiers. Diana?
Next, we have Beatrice Ibarra, Blair Glennon, Cassidy Kimball, and I believe I have a duplicate here, Catherine Jimenez. So we'll skip to Liz Kay after that.
Thank you, and feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hello, my name is Blair Glennon. I am a resident of District 2 and would like to speak in favor of this ordinance. Standing up to people in power is sometimes messy and unpleasant. It doesn't always make powerful friends happy. I spoke up when my former workplace, Legacy Emmanuel, was colluding with ICE, and it did not go well. They did not change their policies. I am now a temporarily unemployed and uninsured person. But it's still 100% worth it for all of us to stand up for our community members being targeted by ICE. I want to point out that Portland police are not the victims in this circumstance. They can continue to use weaponized victimization as much as they would like. They are still not the victims. Counselor Zimmerman, hopefully you will look back at public testimony. I read your New Year's newsletter. You spoke as though federal overreach and ICE issues, you spoke about federal overreach and ICE issues as if they were solved. You should be especially concerned about this issue given the ICE facility that is used as a home base to terrorize the entire Portland metropolitan area is in your district. Please push this ordinance forward. Thank you.
You can start.
Okay. Members of the council and the terrified citizens of Portland. We are in the middle of an unstable and dangerous part of our history. People are being ripped from their families, assaulted, kidnapped, and then taken without any accountability or documentation. These federal officers have been allowed to run rampant and destroy innocent people's lives in the name of the government. In public, in plain sight, they hide their faces, refuse to give identification of any kind, and have even started shooting people point blank while being surrounded by cameras. With that, they are still continuing to lie. They are using fear and violence to try to force the public and state and city governments to comply. They are now currently going door to door in Minneapolis after the devastating murder of Renee Nicole Good. Door to door. In what world does that constitute the parameters of Border Patrol? The state and city govs are just standing by and allowing our constitutional rights to erode in front of our very eyes. While I'm glad to see legislation being brought forth in this matter, there is more that needs to be done, and soon. We don't have 18 months to 2 years to implement something as small as uniform and name tag changes, and that's not fast enough. We're asking for more accountability and action from our government. Again, with some of the things, you need to revoke the permit. There is a whole home base here in our city. They are allowed to bring people. They are leaving there in unmarked cars every single day. They're pushing people down. They're tear gassing. I'm a nanny. I work with children. One of the families that I nanny for lives in that apartment building right next to them. They are tear gassing and pepper spraying and all that stuff every single day. They had to move. Like, they are destroying the city. This is not safe. We cannot have them here. Please work on revoking the permit. Also, not requiring officers to detain people impersonating federal, state, or city officers that are currently pretending and with their identities and are using armed forces and fear and intimidation tactics on the public. There's racism prevalent. I don't understand what we're doing. Please take action.
Apologies, but could you state your name for the record?
Oh, Cassidy Kimball.
Thank you so much. Still looking for Beatrice or Liz Kay. All right, we'll move along then to, thank you so much. Join. You can start whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good afternoon. I am a resident of District 1, and I am speaking in support of this mask ordinance, but I also have a pivotal question for the council that hinges on whether or not, if this ordinance passes, it will actually impact public safety. How can we expect PPB to hold ICE accountable for following the law, such as this mask ordinance, when PPB will not even hold their own people accountable, and they've also shown that they are not willing to hold the agents accountable for when they break the laws as well? I have personally witnessed PPB giving preferential treatment towards ICE, selectively enforcing laws around the McAdam ICE facility. Just in the McAdam area alone, officers have refused to take testimony from people who have witnessed a crime, refused to investigate suspicious plateless vehicles or people, refuse to investigate reckless driving endangering pedestrians, and have often taken the side of MAGA aggressors, working seemingly in tandem with MAGA to oppress protesters' freedom of speech. Just days ago, and I hope we all saw the video, a PPB officer essentially told a protester there that he would have shot Renee Nicole Good if put in the same situation. And PPB's response was not to address this very serious danger, but to reassign him. Additionally, many of us here in the community have witnessed Portland police turn a blind eye when ICE is involved, or even just when officers guess that ICE is present. I would like it to be on the record that on October 21st, 2025, around 9 a.m., I saw a suspicious vehicle parked on Moody Avenue, pointed towards the Perk Legal Observer tent, providing resources and support to our neighbors going into the ICE facility for their appointments. During this time, MAGA supporters were posting threats on social media showing ill intentions toward the newly opened Perk Resource Center. The vehicle was completely black with black tint and no plates, and a man in a plaid jacket had been sitting idle there watching for an hour. I never call police because they always make things worse, but in that moment, not knowing the intentions of the man inside, I had to choose between the threat that I knew.
Thank you for your testimony.
I just want these pictures.
Can you state
Feel
for
free
your,
to- If you hand it to her, we'll.
can you state your name for the record, please?
Liz K.
Thank you.
Anna, can you please call up the next?
The next group we have is Benjamin Gilbert, followed by Jesse Akins, then Mark Sherman, and Matt Levine.
Thank you. Please go ahead whenever you're ready, Ben.
Thank you.
Please state your name. Thank you. Sorry.
My name is Ben Gilbert, and I'm a volunteer lobbyist for the Portland Democratic Socialists of America. I want to thank Committee Chair Canal for bringing this draft ordinance for discussion today. I'd also like to thank Committee Chair Novick and Councilors Murillo and Smith for attending this meeting, and I'm disappointed to see Councilor Zimmerman is absent today. Across the Portland metro area and the country, we've all seen masked unidentified individuals, claiming to be federal agents, abducting residents, our neighbors, off the streets and out of our schools, homes, and businesses. If anyone is depriving you of your freedom, you have a right to know who they are. ICE has declared war on our cities, and this is one meaningful step that our local elected officials can take to impact their operations and make it so that it's not as easy to get away with this kind of violence. There's a reason why they're masking their faces. It's because the activities they are engaging in are violent, cruel, and deeply unpopular. If local law enforcement are opposed to laws that increase transparency, it begs the question, what do they have to hide? Just in the past week, we have seen local law enforcement engage in police brutality and express their sympathy with ICE violence. Higher standards for law enforcement are good, whether that be local, county, state, or federal. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jesse Akins. I am not a member of any of the organizations. I am a Portland resident and a disabled combat veteran of the United States Army. The horrible story I'm about to tell you is true. Soon after the conclusion of Operation Desert Storm, Saddam Hussein ordered his military and federal police to enter the neighborhoods of Mosul, Iraq, a northern city of 1.8 million people, not dissimilar to our own, and forcibly remove thousands of Kurdish families from their homes. They drove them into the desert, separated the women and children, executed them with a single pistol round, then mowed the men down with automatic weapons and bulldozed the bodies into two distinct pits they had excavated from the side of a ravine. In 2004, I, along with other members of my unit, guarded this site just a few miles outside of the town of El Hatra, while forensic experts worked to identify the executed women and children. For almost 4 months, they exhumed up to 40 bodies a day until only the inseparable mass of blackened human soup remained. Those we could not recover were recovered with the dirt and soil that had hidden them for close to 15 years. We left the men to rest in their unjust grave. I don't tell you this story to be shocking. It is shocking. And if it wasn't, I'd be concerned for your humanity. I tell you this story because while we do know the names of Saddam Hussein, Uday and Qusay, his sons, and perhaps a few generals, we don't know the names of the others, the ones who did the task. They lived happy lives. Today we discuss how to respond as a community to similar beginnings of far too similar scenario in our own country and our own town, and I want you all to think forward. I want you to think about those who will extract, sort, and catalog our remains from unmarked pits of black human soup. I want you to think of those and how they will know the names of who put us there. The masks and the shadows.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you.
Mark is online.
Yeah, Mark, you can unmute and begin your testimony.
Thank you, folks. My name is Mark Sherman. I totally support this legislation and anything that can make it stronger. I just wanted to comment that I have witnessed firsthand police brutality and police acting violently in crowds. I have called 911 and there was no response except to file a complaint with the Independent Police Review Board. That was not policy to intervene, even if you see an officer doing something wrong. That was not something PPB would ever want to do. While PP say they will intervene under circumstances, I'd like to know what circumstances those are, because I've not really seen that from what they're saying. What I'd like to know is there a situation where ICE could be so excessive, so violent, so repressive that it would trigger something in one of our police officers where they would say, hey, that's enough, that's stepping across the line, I just have to get involved? I don't think that's the case. During COVID, and I live over in the Jade District, almost every Asian business was vandalized. And in some cases, people had video of the people doing the vandalizing. They would have people selling drugs and drug dealing in front of restaurants, and the police would not come out and intervene at all. So while they have a union and while they say there's a lot of things they can't do, what I don't hear from PPB to help us with this is that they understand the problem we're trying to solve, and they want to provide suggestions or ways that they can act that would help us yield the goal of making Portlanders safer. If you're hoping the police will be your aides and friends and partners in this, you might want to really think carefully. They're not going to follow what you say anyway, so you might as well just do the best legislation you can. Please continue to do so, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mark, you're free to, or sorry, Matt, you're free to unmute.
Thank you. My name is Matt Levine. I'm here to express my intense and frankly desperate support for Councillor Canal's draft ordinance to prohibit facial coverings, require badge visibility, and require identity verification for law enforcement. As usual, I would say the city actually needs to go much further than this. But as James Baldwin famously said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And this wisdom was intended as advice for those of us who want to work toward justice, love, and healing in the world. If we're going to create that positive change toward justice and toward the city's core values of anti-racism, equity, transparency, communication, and collaboration, then we must face our problems head on. We must face each other. Masked law enforcement quite literally can't be faced. And let's be clear, Baldwin gave this advice to those of us wanting to work toward justice and healing because he understood those who are creating injustice and oppression were already aware of and weaponizing it. Denial, hiding, ignorance are all tools that those who harm community use daily. Those law enforcement officers who are hiding their faces are sending us a message. They intend to hurt us. They intend to do things that need to be hidden. They intend to murder people like Keith Porter Jr. and Renee Nicole Good. They intend to shoot our community members in East Portland. And they are not rogue agents. They are taking orders from Trump, from Noam, from Homan, who prepared them with the language of domestic terrorism. So again, we need this ordinance from Councillor Canal to pass. But honestly, we need much, much more than that. We need our mayor, Keith Wilson, to do the same that the mayor of Minneapolis has. We need to hear you screaming from the rooftops at ICE, at CBP, at DHS to get the fuck out of our city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Charlie Michelle Wesley, Connor Lennon, and Jane Ismarlian. Oh, and then Ivan Vargas. I didn't count correctly there.
Shall I go ahead? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead,
We
Charlie.
can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sick, so bear with me. I am Charlie Michelle Wesley, tribal member of the federally recognized Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, honoring this indigenous land now called Oregon. First, I want to thank Councillor Canal for your efforts with this ordinance. These nightmare abductions of our immigrants and others because of this racist regime which makes any brown person a target and those that stand with them, and also includes the indigenous peoples of this land. 4 enrolled tribal members of the Oglala Lakota Sioux Nation have been abducted, and after an attorney inquiry, it is still unknown their whereabouts. The genocide continues. Tribal members are being informed to say, I am a citizen of the federally recognized tribal nation under the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. All Native people born within the territorial limits of the United States are recognized as U.S. citizens by birthright. Because we are both tribal citizens and U.S. citizens, ICE has no lawful authority to detain us, and yet they do. I ask that the city of Portland include in this ordinance honoring various IDs, especially our tribal IDs and affiliations, since they just, any brown person will do for them. Our Northwest tribal nations are demanding answers regarding profiling of tribal members nationwide. Despite having tribal IDs on their person, they're being detained, uncertain of the legitimacy of the terrifying mass abductors, especially in unmarked vehicles, which should be a mandate in this ordinance to be marked, not an option. Finally, we have no defense against militarized law enforcement. They hold all the power, and we pay dearly because of it. When law enforcement are militarized, what does the military need? They need enemies, and that is us. Reminder, the first core city values of anti-racism states action to dismantle institutional systemic racism are the responsibility of every employee, and that goes on. But what the city, I want to know, what is the city's strategy to get the feds to literally get this hell out of Portland? The community deserves.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for your testimony. Connor, you can unmute and begin your testimony.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. For the record, my name is Connor Lennon. Thank you, Committee Chair Canal, for bringing this ordinance to the committee today. I think in today's day, we have all seen or heard or read about or watched a video or any of the above about ICE activity in our neighborhoods or in other neighborhoods around this country. And I think with this happening, there's also a wave of bad faith actors. And I appreciate this ordinance not just for the accountability that it's going to bring to Portland Police Bureau and the accountability that they're going to try to hold ICE to, but also the accountability that we are now going to put on these bad faith actors to make sure that we don't have people that are not affiliated with any organization showing up in our communities and hurting our neighbors. That is absolutely unacceptable. And I think while we can talk as much as we want to about how this may make PPB's job harder, frankly, I don't care. I would rather see my neighbors alive and safe and going home every day to their families, their friends. That is more important to me than allowing domestic terrorism I am in full support of this ordinance and in any change that Councillor Canal would like to make to it and that this committee sees fit. I'd like to yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last call for Jane Ismarlian or Ivan Vargas. Oh, I see. Go for it.
testify in support of the mask ordinance. It is clear the White House has no intention of slowing down their violence against immigrants and American citizens alike. Since the murder of Renee Nicole Good last Wednesday, immigration agents have only continued to intensify the level of terror they're committing against innocent people. The mask ordinance is a step in the right direction towards creating accountability. However, we ask you not to just stop at that. We call on you to take whatever action necessary to throw a wrench in the gears of this fascist regime. The administration has completely thrown the concept of rule of law or civility out the window. Now is not the time for business as usual. Don't let them catch you from behind. You need to act with a sense of urgency. City Council, we demand you pass the mask ordinance, revoke the ICE permit, and take all actions possible to stand in solidarity with your fellow Portlanders. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Diana, could you please call the next panel of testifiers?
Next, we have Darren Hertzberg, Isabella Shepard, Karen Chire, Laura Curry.
Oh, I believe I'm up next, yeah? All right, good afternoon, citizens of Portland. Many of you already know me, but for those that don't, my name is Darren Hertzberg. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran, proud Portlander and community activist. Started protesting right outside of this building, and it's an honor to speak to you now inside City Hall on behalf of my friends, neighbors, and fellow Portlanders. And thank you, Councilor Kamal, for introducing this ordinance. I stand in support of it. Law enforcement, including federal officers, must be held accountable for their actions. Donald Trump and his fascist goons want their secret police to get away with any and all crimes, which is why they mask up and hide their identities. When our friends and neighbors have their Fifth Amendment due process rights violated, it is done so anonymously by an overpaid, undertrained, and thoroughly bigoted band of mercenaries with badges. When I was violently assaulted by DHS and ICE officers in front of the McAdam ICE facility, I was unable to determine the identity of the officers that committed crimes against me. I still don't know the identity of the officer that sent me flying across the pavement, and the badge number of the officer, 6160, that slammed my face repeatedly in the ground and told me, "Not talking shit anymore, are you?" That was a really fun moment, by the way. Really love that. I know that they are trying to suppress our First Amendment rights. Anyway, his information was not identifiable to me. I was only able to receive it when he was forced to give his badge number during my booking. And just last week, barely a day after the cold-blooded murder of Renee Good, 2 Portlanders were shot in their vehicle by federal agents. Who were these agents? Why did they flee the scene after firing on civilians? Where is their body cam footage? Where is the accountability? PPB has not done enough to keep federal agents accountable for their crimes. They are more concerned with keeping us quiet while we're protesting. Just last week, I was arrested for protesting out in front of the ICE facility. I was being a little too loud for them, apparently. All right, we're gonna have to skip forward here. I'm going to call on City Council to deputize us.
Thank you.
Let us do it.
Thank you for your testimony. I think Isabella's up next.
Hello, I'm Isabella Shepard, representing PDXCD and the Coalition for Revoking the ICE Permit. I would like to support this ordinance. I'm not sure if I can. I would like to highlight that this is the first piece of legislation with any teeth regarding enforcement. I have argued before that PPB should be instructed